It's Nick!
Oh, Nikki! Hi, baby!
Honey, I Shrunk the Kids wasn't a superhero saga. It wasn't a space battle. It wasn't even a fairy tale. It was a backyard blown up into a survival epic. But behind the giant Cheerios and the killer lawnmower, it was chaos stitched together with duct tape and desperation. The director quit before cameras rolled. Rick Moranis only stepped in after bigger stars bailed. And in a summer ruled by blockbusters, one tiny film stole the spotlight, with Batman as its secret weapon. These are 20 weird facts about Honey, I Shrunk the Kids. And buried in the danger and the mayhem, it started as horror and ended as a backyard turned lethal. This wasn't kids' play. It was a backyard built to kill. Number 1. The movie we remember as a warm backyard adventure almost began as something much darker. The idea came from Stuart Gordon, the cult horror director behind Reanimator and From Beyond. When he first pitched Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, it wasn't a lighthearted family comedy. It was closer to a sci-fi survival tale, where the shrunken children faced a backyard that felt more like a nightmare than a playground. In Gordon's early vision, towering grass loomed like walls, insects were predators, and the tone leaned toward menace rather than fun. But then life changed his outlook. Around this time, Gordon became a father, and that new perspective softened his approach. He began to imagine the story through a child's eyes, where giant blades of grass weren't traps but adventures, and oversized toys sparked wonder instead of dread. The dangerous moments remained, but now they played as thrilling challenges instead of pure terror. That shift in tone turned the project from an experimental horror concept into a story filled with humor, heart, and childlike wonder. And in doing so, Gordon accidentally laid the foundation for one of Disney's most beloved live-action hits, a film that captured the magic and peril of childhood imagination. Number 2. Before it became a household phrase, this movie's title went through some truly bizarre drafts. At first, Disney tossed around names like Teeny Weenies, Grounded, and The Backyard. None of them landed. They were either too silly, too vague, or just not memorable enough to sell a big summer movie. The turning point came from the script itself. In a moment of frantic confession, Wayne Szalinski blurts out the line, "Honey, I Shrunk the Kids." It was funny, it was direct, and it instantly explained the premise. Disney locked onto it, grammar mistakes and all, and that so-called mistake became genius branding. The phrase felt authentic, the kind of thing a frazzled dad might actually say after realizing he'd made the worst parenting blunder in history. Instead of fading into the pile of forgettable 80s family comedies, that one imperfect line gave the movie its identity, and a title still quoted today. Number 3. Stuart Gordon didn't just pitch Honey, I Shrunk the Kids. He was supposed to direct it. Disney greenlit the project with his vision in mind, and for months he was attached as the man who would bring the shrunken backyard adventure to life. But fate had other plans. Just as production was gearing up, Gordon fell seriously ill, forcing him to step away from the project entirely. It was a devastating blow, especially since the idea had started with him. Disney scrambled to find a replacement, and the studio eventually turned to Joe Johnston. Johnston wasn't a seasoned director. In fact, this would be his debut. But what he lacked in directing credits, he more than made up for with special effects experience. He had worked as a visual effects artist on Star Wars, and even won an Oscar for Raiders of the Lost Ark. That background made him the perfect candidate to handle a movie that lived and died on its practical effects and sense of scale. The gamble paid off. Johnston brought a lighter, more playful touch that balanced the adventure with warmth, turning what could have been a straightforward effects showcase into a family classic. And though Gordon never got to direct, his idea lived on, reshaped by Johnston into the film audiences still adore. Number 4. The role of Wayne Szalinski, the bumbling inventor dad at the heart of Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, didn't start with Rick Moranis. Disney originally had their eyes on Chevy Chase, who at the time was one of the biggest comedy stars in the world. Coming off hits like Caddyshack, Vacation, and Fletch, Chase seemed like a natural fit for the eccentric scientist. But when scheduling conflicts got in the way, he passed on the role. Next in line was another comedy heavyweight, John Candy. Disney offered him the part, hoping his lovable, larger-than-life personality could carry the film. But Candy turned it down too. Instead, in what turned out to be a fateful twist, he suggested his good friend Rick Moranis. Candy had worked with him before and knew that Moranis had the right mix of warmth and offbeat humor to make Wayne believable. That single recommendation changed everything. Moranis didn't just play play the part. He embodied it. His quirky, nerdy charm made Wayne a different kind of movie dad. Not the stern authority figure or slapstick goof, but a lovable dreamer whose inventions kept spiraling out of control. Audiences connected instantly, and Wayne Szalinski became one of Moranis' most iconic roles. In hindsight, it's hard to imagine anyone else shrinking the kids. What started as a backup casting choice became one of Disney's most perfect bits of movie magic. Number 5. On screen, the Szalinski home looks like pure suburban Americana. Kids biking down tree-lined streets, neighbors chatting on front lawns. But none of it was real. Disney built the entire neighborhood from scratch at Churubusco Studios in Mexico City. Every house, every lawn, even the sidewalks were carefully crafted facades. Only a handful of establishing shots came from California, just enough to sell the illusion. The controlled set in Mexico gave the crew total freedom. They could blow things up, flood the yard, and seamlessly connect to the oversized backyard sets where most of the action unfolded. That decision paid off in ways audiences never noticed. What felt like a familiar lived-in neighborhood was actually one of Disney's most elaborate illusions. And without it, the kids' journey from the attic to the jungle-sized backyard wouldn't have felt nearly as believable. Number 6. The magic of Honey, I Shrunk the Kids wasn't just in the shrinking machine, it was in the backyard. To sell the illusion that the kids were now the size of ants, the filmmakers couldn't rely on CGI. Instead, they built an entire world of colossal props that turned an ordinary lawn into something out of Alice in Wonderland. Crews constructed 30-foot blades of grass, each one made of fiberglass and foam, towering so high they had to be anchored like telephone poles. Lego bricks were scaled up to the size of small cars, while cookie crumbs were sculpted from plaster and painted to look edible. The most jaw-dropping piece? A massive 16,000-gallon tank filled with giant floating Cheerios, where Rick Moranis famously tries to scoop his kids out of breakfast. To pull it off, they engineered oversized cereal pieces from urethane foam, coated them with real milk-like liquid, and even rigged bubbles so the whole thing sloshed like a real bowl. On set, the effect was surreal. Crew members would wander among towering grass or lean against a Lego block as big as a couch, joking that they felt like the ones who'd been shrunk. For the young cast, the illusion was even more powerful. They weren't pretending to crawl through a backyard, they were living inside a giant's playground. And that's why, decades later, those scenes still feel so tangible, because in a way, they were. Number 7. The Bumblebee ride wasn't just a fun moment on screen, it was an engineering marvel. To make it work, the crew built multiple bees, a full-sized prop for close-up shots, a rigged platform that could swoop the child actors around, and a $30,000 miniature robot bee for aerial stunts. Each version was carefully matched so the footage could be cut together seamlessly. On screen, the illusion was so convincing that kids in the audience swore the actors were really flying through the backyard skies. Behind the scenes, it was wires, hydraulics, and weeks of painstaking work, all to sell a single magical moment that became one of the movie's most unforgettable sequences. Number 8. Rain was supposed to be simple. A sprinkler, a hose, a downpour. But in Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, normal water looked pathetic, like mist on camera, so the effects crew went rogue. They thickened the liquid until every drop fell heavy, like jelly from the sky. When it hit the oversized sets, it didn't trickle, it exploded. Huge arcs, splashing waves, like water balloons detonating in slow motion. The actors weren't just getting wet, they were getting hammered by gallons of syrupy rain, each droplet engineered to feel like a natural disaster. That's why the storm scene still feels larger than life. It wasn't CGI, it was rain, rebuilt from scratch, falling like the sky itself had turned against them. Number 9. For millions of kids in 1989, the breakout star of Honey, I Shrunk the Kids wasn't Rick Moranis or the giant backyard sets. It was Auntie, the scrappy aunt who became both steed and best friend to the shrunken kids. But behind the scenes, Disney wasn't so sure anyone should love him at all. Auntie was a nightmare to build and control. The creature wasn't CGI, but a massive puppet made of latex, foam, horsehair, and metal supports, brought to life by as many as 16 operators at once. Each twitch of his antennae, each scuttle of his legs, had to be carefully timed so he looked both insect-like and strangely endearing. Even then, Disney executives worried audiences would recoil. Early versions of Auntie looked too realistic, too frightening, more like something out of a horror movie than a family adventure. adventure. Execs suggested redesigning him to resemble E.T. or a cartoon bug, softer and cuter. Director Joe Johnston fought back. He believed the kid's bond with Auntie had to feel earned, not forced. If he was too cuddly, his death wouldn't sting. So Auntie stayed an aunt, rough edges and all. And when the moment came, audiences wept. Kids sobbed in theaters. Parents admitted they were misty-eyed, and critics singled it out as one of the film's most powerful beats. Disney may have doubted him, but Auntie proved unforgettable. A six-legged hero who crawled his way into movie history. Number 10. One of the movie's most mouth-watering moments came with that giant Oreo cookie. On screen, it looked like pure backyard wonder, the kids clambering over frosting and grabbing handfuls of chocolate crumbs. But here's the truth. It wasn't all movie magic. For close-ups, the crew actually built edible sections out of cake and real frosting so the young actors could take genuine bites. The base, though, was heavy foam and wood for stability. Part dessert, part construction project. Between takes, the kids were buzzing on sugar highs, crawling across a sticky, melting prop that smelled like an actual bakery. What audiences saw was childhood fantasy. What the crew remembers is a set that was as sweet as it was chaotic. Number 11. Sometimes the smallest details slip through, even in a big-budget Disney film. Look closely at Diane Selinsky. Her hair color actually changes midway through the movie. Actress Marcia Strassman began filming with red hair, but partway through production, Disney asked her to dye it blonde. The early footage was already in the can, and instead of reshooting, they simply left it. The result? In some scenes, she's a redhead, and in others, she's blonde. A jarring shift that no one on set seemed worried about. Most audiences didn't notice at the time, swept up in the adventure. But once you see it, you can't unsee it. It's one of those continuity quirks that makes fans wonder, how did nobody catch this before release? Number 12. Before the kids ever set foot in the backyard jungle, the movie was already breaking new ground in the opening credits. The animated title sequence, showing tiny kids dodging typewriters and record players, was one of the first to blend traditional hand-drawn animation with early 3D modeling. The work came from Croyer Films, a small studio that included Andrew Stanton, who would later co-create Pixar classics like Toy Story and Finding Nemo, and even Gwen Stefani's brother Eric. The sequence impressed Disney so much that Croyer Films was immediately hired to design credits for Troop Beverly Hills and Christmas Vacation. Decades later, most fans remember the giant Cheerios and the Lego blocks, but few realized the movie was pushing animation forward before the adventure even began. Number 13. The title, Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, might sound normal now, but in 1989, it raised eyebrows. Teachers, critics, and grammar sticklers pointed out the error. Strictly speaking, Wayne Selinsky should have said shrank, not shrunk. The fuss grew so loud that the movie actually won the 1989 Spell Dunce Cap Award for Worst Grammar in a Title. Disney's response? Pure confidence. They said it was intentional, because that's exactly how Wayne would have said it. And really, they were right. The slip-up gave the movie charm, making it sound like something a flustered dad would blurt out after vaporizing his kids. What began as a grammar mistake became a marketing gift. The title stuck in people's heads, awards or not, and today, it's part of pop culture history. Number 14. Audiences didn't just get one movie ticket in 1989, they got two. Before Honey, I Shrunk the Kids started, Disney premiered Tummy Trouble, a brand new Roger Rabbit short. It was the studio's first original animated short in 25 years, and it reminded fans just how groundbreaking Roger Rabbit had been the year before. The pairing was genius. Families laughed through the cartoon chaos of Roger and Baby Herman, then dove headfirst into Wayne Selinsky's Shrinking Ray adventure. The double feature worked so well that Disney kept releasing new Roger shorts alongside other films. It wasn't just bonus content, it was Disney reviving an old tradition of theatrical shorts, and it gave Honey a unique opening act that made the whole experience feel bigger than a single movie. Number 15. In the late 80s and early 90s, Rick Moranis was one of Hollywood's most bankable comedy stars. From Ghostbusters to Spaceballs to Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, he had a unique charm. Awkward but lovable, funny but grounded. He didn't look like a leading man, but that was the point. He was the dad next door, the neighbor you trusted. And just when his career seemed unstoppable, tragedy struck. In 1991, his wife Anne passed away after a battle with cancer. With two young children suddenly depending on him alone, Moranis made a choice almost unheard of in Hollywood. He walked away. He turned down roles, stepped out of the spotlight, and devoted his life to being a full-time father. For decades, his face faded from theaters. Fans kept asking, whatever happened to Rick Moranis? Not realizing he was busy with the most important role of his life. Every so often, he'd resurface, lending his voice to animated projects, or even reprising Dark Helmet for a Goldberg's cameo. But a real return seemed impossible. Then, in 2020, Disney made the announcement fans had been waiting over 25 5 years for. Moranis would come back for the reboot Shrunk. The news spread like wildfire, greeted with the kind of joy usually reserved for rock stars reuniting. For audiences who grew up watching him, it wasn't just a comeback. It was proof that sometimes the quietest exits can lead to the most celebrated returns. Number 16. For millions of fans, Honey, I Shrunk the Kids wasn't just about Rick Moranis or giant props. It was about the 4 kids who carried the adventure. They battled bees, tamed Auntie, and faced down lawnmowers with wide-eyed terror. For a moment, they were the faces of one of Disney's biggest live-action hits. But Hollywood can be a strange place. For 3 of them, the backyard was the beginning and the end. Robert Oliveri, who played Nick Selinsky, seemed destined for stardom. He even reprised his role in the sequel and appeared in Edward Scissorhands. Then, almost overnight, he walked away, vanishing from the industry entirely. Jared Rushton, Ron Thompson, the tough kid who softened by the end, had already been in Big and Overboard. By the mid-90s, he too left acting behind. Amy O'Neill, who played teenage Amy Selinsky, tried modeling and a handful of roles before leaving Hollywood as well, later surfacing decades later in a Blink and You'll Miss It cameo on Baskets. Only Thomas Wilson Brown, who played Little Russ, stuck around, carving out a modest career in smaller films and television. Meanwhile, the adults kept working. Matt Frewer found steady roles in sci-fi cult favorites like Orphan Black, and Marcia Strassman worked until her tragic passing in 2014. For the kids, though, the backyard adventure became more than just a movie. It was both their moment in the sun and their farewell to it. Number 17. James Horner gave the movie its heartbeat, a score filled with energy, adventure, and wonder. But here's the strange part. Disney never released it. Despite Horner's music elevating every sequence, from Auntie's sacrifice to the thrill of the Bumblebee ride, the soundtrack sat locked away for decades. It wasn't until 2009, 20 years after the film's release, that a small label finally pressed just 3,000 copies. They sold out almost instantly, becoming prized collector's items. By then, Horner had already cemented his legacy with Braveheart, Titanic, and Avatar. And, in a heartbreaking twist, just 6 years later, he died in a plane crash. For fans, that rare Honey, I Shrunk the Kids release isn't just a soundtrack. It's a piece of history from one of cinema's greatest composers. Number 18. Summer 1989 belonged to Batman. Tim Burton's gothic superhero epic had lines stretching around city blocks, merchandise flooding every store, and hype unlike anything Hollywood had ever seen. Against that juggernaut, Honey, I Shrunk the Kids looked like an afterthought, a quirky family comedy destined to get crushed. But fate had a funny twist in store. When Batman opened, theaters were packed to bursting. Parents with kids quickly realized the long waits, late-night screenings, and brooding PG-13 tone weren't exactly family-friendly. So while older teens and adults flocked to Gotham, families turned to the smaller movie playing next door. And once they bought a ticket to Honey, word of mouth did the rest. The backyard adventure became the surprise alternative hit of the summer. With its practical effects, lovable performances, and a story every kid could imagine in their own backyard, it grew week by week. By the end of its run, the film had quietly grossed $222 million worldwide, becoming Disney's highest-grossing live-action release at the time. It didn't just survive Batman mania, it thrived because of it. While Batman claimed the headlines, Honey, I Shrunk the Kids stole families' hearts and proved that sometimes the little movie can stand tall against a giant. Number 19. By the late 80s, Disney's live-action division was struggling. Big-budget experiments like Return to Oz had flopped, and executives weren't sure if the brand could compete outside of animation. Honey, I Shrunk the Kids changed that. Made for just $18 million, the film didn't look like a studio saver on paper. But week after week, families kept showing up, spreading word of mouth that this was a kids' movie adults could love too. Slowly, the box office piled up. By the end of its run, it had grossed $222 million worldwide, a staggering return that pulled Disney's live-action arm out of its slump. It proved the studio could still deliver blockbusters outside of animation. Without Honey, there's a good chance we wouldn't have gotten the live-action streak that defined Disney through the 90s. Number 20. The movie's success didn't end with the sequels. In 1997, Disney launched Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, the TV show. It ran for 3 seasons and produced 66 episodes, a surprisingly long run for a spin-off. But there was one major problem: no Rick Moranis. Without the heart of the films, the series flew under the radar. It had a small following, especially among kids who watched Disney Channel reruns. But most fans of the original movies barely knew it existed. Today, it feels like a curious footnote, a reminder of just how big the shrinking Ray once was, even if the TV version never captured the same magic. Bonus fact: For years, fans have been waiting to return to the backyard. In 2019, Disney announced Shrunk, a modern-day reboot with Josh Gad as Wayne Selinsky's grown-up son and Rick Moranis finally returning after more than 2 decades away. The news hit like a miracle. The dad who walked away was stepping back into the spotlight. But Hollywood had other plans. The shoot was set for 2020. Then the pandemic struck. Disney shifted to Marvel and Star Wars, and Shrunk slid further down the slate. Each year brought whispers that it was still alive, but no cameras ever rolled. For fans, the delay cuts deep. Moranis' comeback was supposed to be a celebration, a full-circle return of one of cinema's most beloved dads. Instead, the project has shrunk into development quicksand, and just like the kids in the original film, audiences are left staring across a backyard that suddenly feels impossibly large, wondering if they'll ever make it to the other side. Honey, I Shrunk the Kids wasn't supposed to be Disney's biggest live-action hit. It came from a sick director, a rejected horror pitch, and a title people mocked for bad grammar. Yet somehow, it all clicked. It gave us giant Cheerios, a pet ant that made us cry, and a backyard that became the greatest adventure a kid could dream of. It saved Disney's live-action division, became a pop culture landmark, and left fans begging for more. If this backyard adventure still makes you imagine what it'd be like to be half an inch tall, drop a comment. Tell us what magical classic we should shrink down to next, because sometimes the biggest stories come from the smallest ideas.